talk with some of the folks involved in something you may have heard of called Operation SMN. If you hadn't heard of it, they're going to give you a brief introduction. Just quick poll, how many people are familiar with Op SMN? Okay, fair amount of people. So first, I want to remind everyone, I've gotten a lot of great feedback about the summit so far. Hopefully that's a predominant view, but the only way that it counts for the SANS powers that be is if you fill out the surveys. So please fill those out. I know it means a lot for Rick and I, and it also means a lot for SANS, so that we can continue to do this summit and hopefully continue to improve upon it. One other administrative announcement. For those of you who are taking classes, you will be able to pick up your class materials out here in the back anytime, I guess, after this and into this afternoon, if that's something you want to do. And I think without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and let the panel introduce themselves, and we will get moving on this. So go ahead, Rich.
So I'm Rich Barger. I'm a Chief Intelligence Officer at Threat Connect. And our role within the operation was everything from providing some adult supervision for Andre to doing some of the initial drafting on the reporting, sharing signatures that we used operationally, opening up the platform Threat Connect to allow folks to kind of collate some of their research. So it's kind of a overview.
Cool. Brian Bartholomew, I'm with Eyesight Partners. We're a vendor out there that basically provides threat intelligence. So we helped out. We pretty much coughed up everything we had on this group and this threat actor, and we had some unique visibilities for some victims out there. So we kind of tossed that into the mix, and hopefully it helped out. I think it did. So.
I'm Zachary Neef. I'm the Director of Data Science, Applied Data Science at Novetta. Our role was kind of kicking this whole thing off. We started the Op SMN, and personally I did a lot of the network analysis and infrastructure identification for this particular threat actor.
And I am Nick LeVay. I'm the Chief Security Officer of Bit9 Carbon Black. I run our internal security program and play a lot of little alignment functions between our different business units, partners, and external entities and whatnot. And our role in the op, we came in pretty late to the game, so our role was kind of a little bit of narrative tweaking and whatnot, and mostly making sure that everything that we knew about the actor that didn't somehow betray one of our customers found its way into the report.
Green light. All right, Zach, so you want to go ahead and
Let's start the slides.
Walk us through?
Yeah. And that's it.
There we go. So yeah, we've titled this with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. Op SMN from Malcop to Voltron. And it's kind of titled that way just mostly because of the fact that this is one of the larger industry efforts, probably one of the first wave of industry efforts where everyone kind of gets together, works together, shares all the indicators of compromise, and actually has a meaningful effect at the end. So Operation SMN was a coordinated effort to degrade what we've called the Axiom Group's capabilities. We kind of started by searching out malware associated and related to HiKit, and it's just started to expand and expand until we got this fuller operating picture of this fairly advanced actor who was doing a lot of activities that were relating to IP theft and large-scale compromise of international organizations. It was led by us, Novetta. There were 9 publicly involved vendors, all of whom were sharing data. And we had pretty substantial coordination with a large number of additional security vendors and researchers who have decided to be silent partners for one reason or another. So the strategic goals of the overall operation were to establish a repeatable playbook for us, the industry, as well as the ecosystem owners to be able to leverage as we kind of go forward. This is not the first advanced actor we've seen. This is certainly not going to be the last. But we've definitely decided that there were better ways of dealing with this kind of scenario than have been seen in the last, several years. We wanted to demonstrate very clearly the role that industry could play against threats like this, leading by example, And then finally, we wanted to make sure that the operation had a meaningful effect. The last thing we wanted to do was do a lot of reporting, do a lot of talks, and not really have any remediations, not have any customers or anyone outside in industry be actually protected from this particular threat. So to that end, we kind of had to capture and share all of our tools, techniques, and practices, our reverse engineering knowledge, and a lot of the other stuff that we extracted during the course of this operation with the entirety of the world. So this is the timeline that we kind of moved through since the beginning of the operation. We had started identifying victims of HiKit individually around July of 2014. And as we started to identify these victims and start interviewing them and start speaking with customers who may have been related, we started to get this fuller picture of a large tool chain being used to use HiKit as kind of the end result of a long tail compromise. August 2014, we started identifying partners because we had identified that this was something much larger than we'd be able to deal with certainly on our own, and we needed the help of a larger industry group to be able to be effective. 2014 is when we published most of our findings. On the 15th, I believe, if my memory still serves, we published the initial triage reports and the initial announcement about the fact that there was an operation going on. And then I believe it would have been the 28th when we released all the rule sets, reporting in the fullest possible extent, and we started to do large-scale ecosystem mitigation. And then from November till today, we've been doing continuing monitoring, measurement, and adjustment of mitigations within the ecosystem. We've had a very large and very measurable effect. So one of the things that we had to deal with when we started this coalition was identifying people and deciding who needed to be involved. Those of us on the coalition who had been working in this space for a little while, we all know the issues you have when you have too many people in the room. And so we started with identifying people that we knew we could directly trust, obviously, anyone with a personal relationship, and we began to expand that as the operation went on for people who were able to bring actual capabilities to bear. They either could present reverse engineering talent, or they had customers who were known to be compromised, or they had various tools that we could use as a remediation and interdiction kind of support. All of these things were what we considered when we started inviting more and more people to the group. The focus partners, the smaller ones, were brought in for smaller niche capabilities, and then the larger ones were generally brought in for their visibility and scale into the larger Windows ecosystem as a whole. And we were all under a different set of NDAs. It was actually kind of hilarious at certain stages. We had our own customer NDAs, which we all had to adhere to, and then we had the larger operational NDA, which we all had to adhere to. And it worked out fantastically because of the members that we had, because of the reach that the members had. We were able to collect a large number of samples. We were able to share everything deliberately. We were able to do unified work on one particular set without violating anyone's NDAs whatsoever. And this was a serious success on the whole. One of the questions that I've gotten when speaking about this report, and certainly we got immediately after the releasing of it, was why wasn't the invite list larger? And obviously you've got the general logistical overhead and you've got the operational security concerns. But we partnered with so many of the major ecosystem owners that we were able to leverage a lot of their capabilities so that we were able to reach 64 industry partners across 22 individual countries through programs that they had already had up and running. And this ultimately was our main outreach. In addition to the reporting, we had directed contact through industry groups to be able to inform people on how to protect their environments and how to update particular products that they had so that their customers would be protected. The interdiction is something that I've been kind of referring to a little bit. We're using a little bit of a different word than remediation. Remediation infers that we kind of walked out and we shut down all the malware everywhere, and that was the end of it. And that's not what you deal with when you're dealing with an advanced actor. We definitely went out. We definitely shut down a large amount of malware, but this is an ongoing effort. We needed to be able to continuously knock this actor back. Advanced actors do not stop after the first roadblock. They are funded. This is their job. This is what they do all day. None of us stop when we have the first compromise or we see the first roadblock. We keep going back at it. And that's exactly what happens. The goal of our interdiction was not to remove an actor from the face of the internet. The goal of an interdiction is to make sure that actor is put into a continuing cycle where they're knocked back. They have to be forced to make economic decisions about whether or not they can continue attacking. We've taken their tools away. They now need to make some kind of cost-benefit analysis to creating new tools. And that's something that we've definitely been seeing throughout the course of this, and we're counting that as a huge success. Finally, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have anything inside of a necessarily remediation effort where it was a single vendor. We needed to make sure every vendor had all of the data. We needed to make sure every vendor had new rule sets and identifiers. And we wanted to make sure that no one was able to use this as a leverage point inside of the larger industry where they could say, we're the only ones who know about this. No, that's not effective at the end of the day. So the aftermath of what happened. So post October, we started to see Axiom begin reacting to a lot of the activity that we did. We saw multiple partners release their own remediation efforts and their own tool set efforts immediately after the publication, which is exactly what we were looking for. Overall, we saw over 9,000 remediations, and we saw almost 2,000 high-kit infections, which we identify as late-stage intrusions that were detected in progress, which is fantastic. And the final thing that we are counting as a major success is the fact that the reporting as a whole was very controlled. We didn't get sensationalized. We did everything we definitely could, and I think we succeeded in many ways in keeping the focus on the most important thing, which is that we hurt a very significant threat actor on the internet. So these are some remediation numbers from some of our industry partners, and they've let us publish these today. Family names on one side and the number of machines that were actually remediated on the other. And I'm using the word remediation here specifically because these were active malware infections. This was code running at the time when it was remediated and removed from the local machine. If you look towards the middle there, that's 188 different high-kit infections, and that is a huge number because in the general order of operations that this particular actor has been observed using, by the time high-kit is installed on your network, they're in and you cannot get them out. It's very, very difficult to get these guys out once they've gotten in there. And high-kit was their tool for long-stage persistence and information egress. So by the time we saw high-kit, someone had lost intellectual property. There's just no two ways about it. And we saw 188 individual machines get remediated across some very large number of organizations. And then this is the number of blocked samples that we had observed from this particular vendor. And there are all sorts of reasons why numbers can be weird. Some were blocked by other vendors before this one could get to it and all the other fun stuff there. But the blocked samples here indicate samples that were removed before they had a chance to run, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've had a directed and measurable success. And one of the best things that we've observed is after starting to put out the different vendors and their remediation tactics, we've seen Axiom actually change their tools. And we've seen minor alterations to their techniques and the general practices that they have. We've seen them move to new malware families, and we're observing them, and there's going to be another publication in the hopefully fairly near future where we're able to knock them back again and continuously put them in that, that cycle of having to reevaluate their methodology. That is the 10, 15-minute overview of everything that we did. If you haven't read the report, this should be a fairly succinct overview. What's up on the slide right now is a large list of things that all of us, and certainly everyone else within the coalition who was a participant, noticed that things that worked and things that didn't. And I won't go through all of these right here specifically. Let's take a second here before we start kind of instigating some activity.
Well, I have a few questions for you guys, so I'll get it started while the audience kind of ponders it. So first of all, just for, I think, baseline clarity, what are some of the other names that different industries use for this particular intrusion set that you went after?
That'd be one of you guys.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of water under the bridge since we put that out, but there was it's all within the report. There was a handful from not only the actual actors, or the different industry names for the actors, but then also the capability, right? So the backdoor would take on a name, and so then you had Tower of Babel issues with mapping that, and uncertainty to a certain degree as to, whether a certain panda lined up with a certain whatever, and so
a lot of campaign names.
Campaign
names.
And so I'm basically trying to get at so that the folks who don't know this actor by different names can.
There's been so you've heard of Aurora Panda, I believe, was kind of wrapped into that. Some of Deep Panda, I believe.
Hidden Links.
The Hidden
Yes,
Links.
Hidden Links. Then you had we actually call the group Tailgater. There's a name called Sports Fans that's out there for some of those that know that.
Flower Lady was looped
Yeah.
into this too.
I mean, you can clearly see there's like 19 different names for this.
Right, right, which is exactly why I asked. So hopefully one of those rings bells.
Yeah, and that maps back to a time in which everybody was in a very much of a go it alone mindset, which then when you kind of come and you attack the problem from a different angle, you're certainly dealing with some that historic baggage.
Then you have to give it a different name.
Yeah, and it's got to be noted too.
So if we could sit on that for a second. So we tried, when we authored the summary, we made an attempt to use a variable, essentially, a static variable, essentially, for what we were going to call this thing. And we were like, we got to pick a noun. Like, this just isn't working like $threat. Like, it's not going to go, over well. So it's a huge challenge, and I don't, have a solution for
Right,
that.
you certainly, and I don't want to kind of dive into the nomenclature issues. We've seen from the antivirus industry that is somewhat of an intractable problem. But, all right, great. And so I guess you showed some of the numbers that you guys, were able to achieve. Did you have any expectations going in? Did you have a objective goal other than the general goal of, we need to make this more costly for them? Did you have a vantage point up front where you said this is the quantitative problem and here are our quantitative results to kind of align and measure success based on what you hope to accomplish?
So at the very beginning of all of this, we had only an idea that there were a handful of compromises. And having looked at some of the partners that we had and some of the customers across the coalition as a whole, we definitely had the idea that when we started getting deeper and deeper into HiKit, we saw pretty clearly that there was a operational cadence which led us to believe there was significantly more compromises than we had samples for. We'd see how these guys tended to like doing large-scale watering hole attacks and then finding their victims, filtering it down, and then getting in from there. There were a couple of exceptions to that rule, but they definitely liked that strategy. And as we went through the reverse engineering process, we started finding configurations and other materials that were allowing us to identify that it seemed like we saw something moving in the deep. And we started working with some of the data partners that we had, and we started to do correlation through a lot of the infrastructure that was made visible, and we started to see more and more and more, okay, there's definitely more here. I can't tell you we had a specific number. We expected to see a couple handfuls worth, maybe 3 digits worth. And the data that we've been getting back from the remediation partners, from the people who've been able to push out rules and have on-host effect, it looks like we were effective.
Yeah, and I think another thing that should be pointed out, one of the reasons why this actor is one of the more interesting ones is they are one of the sophisticated ones. They are one of the very sophisticated ones. Their malware is of the upper crust that we see out of the Chinese actors, but particularly their social engineering tactics are among the best, and their targeting is very good. Like, they are very good at doing water hole attacks at very significant sites right before major political events and things like that. They're one of the few actors I've dealt with that's done multi-stage spear phishing attacks, where they will interact with people and build up trust before they actually come in with some kind of payload. So they're one of the few that do that. A lot of them, you just see those one-stroke spear phishing attacks. Hey, here's a well-crafted email. Click on the thing that you can't unclick. These guys are one of the ones that'll do the interaction. They speak extremely good English. They're one of the ones that if you do analysis on, you quickly gain some respect for their tactical sophistication.
So, yeah, I'm going to stop asking questions and hogging the mic.
I'll have this for a while. I have several questions. Number one, infrastructure families. Okay,
yes.
Was there any specific infrastructure failings where we could take lessons and hand it back to the security architects so that we can create infrastructure that provides long-term protection, or was everything good?
No, everything was not good.
No.
If everything was good, none of us in this room would have jobs, quite frankly. So the thing that stood out to me the most, certainly, was peripheral infrastructure. Stuff that is hosted outside of your DMZ. Also, there was very clearly from a lot of the victims, they had, let me step back, let's rephrase that. What we saw was this particular actor going out of their way to identify a primary target. They would identify all of the organizations that were considered partners to that primary target, compromise them, and then proceed to do phishing attacks or other kinds of initial ingress based off of that web infrastructure. And a lot of that would just simply not be observed. I don't know if you guys both have some visibility into these areas too.
Exploiting trust. They were very good at exploiting trust.
I think in a certain degree when they would get into further levels or further phases of exploitation, that they were essentially like remotely integrated into your enterprise with specific deployments of backdoors that were unique to that, unique and tailored to the infrastructure in which they operated.
They had one really cool aspect about this group was typically when you're tracking teams like this, you focus on, I mean, you know, Dixie was up here earlier, like PDNS, infrastructure, domains, all that fun stuff. This group, once they got in, you couldn't focus on infrastructure because it would only tell you about that one victim. They actually went out and for each important victim that they had, once they had HiKit or something else on there of that level, they would create an entire infrastructure for their command and control and only use it for that victim. And what's interesting is they would create domain names with the victim name in it. They would use internal proxies to actually ship that data back out. So from a network admin perspective or aspect, you're looking at your external gateways, and all of a sudden your internal systems are the ones that are actually doing the exfil. So I mean, these guys were really good about, you know, staying focused on target by target basis versus the typical actors that have, you know, one set of infrastructure, you can latch onto them via this victim and then find all these other guys. So that's part of what this program was about, was we realized, you know, we have to get out there and get the word out and figure out who's been affected, because without that, you're going to miss a whole ton of stuff.
And I just really want to throw this in the picture, the larger picture of like what we're doing with like threat intelligence. Like we've all seen the pyramid of pain model several times this week, and we've all kind of acknowledged that most of us are crushed by the pyramid of pain because we've got all this data, domain and IP telemetry, and we're doing a poor job using it and integrating it and managing it and all of that. One of the reasons I really want to encourage people to read the report is it very focused on the TTPs, you know, how this actor operates and what kind of tactics they use. Now, like me as a CISO, when I'm sitting back and looking at where I'm going to direct my resources to improve my, my overall, network robustness, resiliency, security, and whatnot, I find that kind of threat intelligence to be incredibly valuable, because I can sit back and I can play the what-if game, and I can do my actor empathy thing and figure out how I got to structure my infrastructure to create a battle space where I can fight an actor like this. So the outcome of the all the various rules and signatures that got pushed out to the industry was to cause the actor pain. So we cause the actor pain. That pain is done. In the context of, can you use that information to protect yourself now? No, that information's done. We've already caused the actor pain. The stuff that is really, really useful at this point, I think, is the analysis about how they operate and what their tactics are, because you have to think about that, because you have to construct your network environment to be able to fight actors that use those kind of tactics.
Okay, so in summary, it sounds like open source intelligence. It sounds like signature-based systems are failing, so behavior-based systems really need to start getting into the infrastructure. It looked like the unique identification of targets, and it also looks like supply chain.
Oh, certainly supply chain.
Yeah, service, okay. The second piece, sorry, I told you I've got a couple. Have you followed up with the loss of specific intellectual property to patents? Because I did this with a specific customer, and we were able to identify a specific law firm that was fronting these patents right up the street, and use that to start questioning what was going on. Have you guys actually taken it to the next level? Because that invalidates patents, that costs money, and that provides additional association back to the adversary.
So, I was going to say, like, if you look at the summary, XM, we did diamond methodology, if you guys are familiar with diamond methodology for intrusion analysis, where we attempted to map kind of a victim up mapping of high-level organization types that were being targeted in and around the timing of the targeting to then infer, adversary motivations, that sort of thing. So specific intellectual property, I wouldn't say we delved that far in terms of analyzing victim-type infrastructure, but that was part of the corpus of the analysis.
Certainly not as a coalition have we dived that deeply. Individual partners may have, but I can't speak to that directly.
In the future, there's probably a room for academia to jump in that particular spot.
How do you guys find the balance between degrading the adversary's actions versus destroying organizations' defenses against that adversary?
Yeah, so that's my hot topic of the day, honestly, under the bad. You have an intel gain and loss on this, right? So, we're trying to get the word out. We're trying to, like Zach said, we're not eradicating the adversary. We're throwing a wrench into their big engine, and we're basically causing them to just retool and start over. The problem when you do that, anytime you do that, anytime one of these reports comes public, whether it's privately done or through a group like this, you're forcing them to change their tactics, at which point you have to start all over again as well. We kind of came to the conclusion that these guys were so prolific and they were causing so much damage out there that the intel loss actually kind of, was less compared to what we would gain from actually causing these guys to
I would say the counter to that, though, was that we did have some common customers in which we were able to say, to bring other partners into the circle and that were open to being a silent partner and give us insights as to when we began to deliver effects, the effectiveness of those, right? And so they could report back, they're shifting right, they're doing this is new. And so that was, for folks that are potentially thinking about doing this in the future, plan for that. Plan for finding people that might be currently dealing with the specific target that you're going to work against and incorporate that into your overall plan so that when you do have an intel gain loss issue or potential, you've built some resiliency into your visibility.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that, because intel loss gain calculus is hard. It's one of the hardest things I think we deal with on a regular basis. So, let's take a look at two situations, right? Let's take a look at the Mandiant APT-1 report. Great report. That report was necessary because it was a wake-up call. 3.5 days of above-the-fold coverage in newspapers and CNN. That did a very good, helpful thing for our community. Now, however, comment crew are clowns, okay? That group is a bunch of clowns. They are totally playbook-based. Their malware sucks. They reuse C2 infrastructure all over the place. They reuse malware variants between multiple companies. So, if you're on top of your game, you'll see their stuff activate, 6 control channels go up, and no data flies over them because it wasn't your company they were activating. They were interested in that day. They just happen to have to activate 8 companies at one time to get where they wanted to go. They're clowns, right? So when that data went out and all those indicators got burned, there was an argument that it had a detrimental effect toward detection. But the reason is because they were clowns. Now, when you look at a group like Axiom, where they're very good about making sure that all their C2 infrastructure and specific malware hashes and the easy-to-signature stuff is specific to a given target organization, it shifts that loss-gain calculus a little bit. So in this case, we weren't interested at all in having the above-the-fold CNN coverage. We were interested in causing the actor pain. So I think that went a lot into the.
Oh yeah, they lost their accesses. I mean, that was if anybody comes from the offensive side, that's the hardest part of the whole thing, right? Is getting your initial foothold. So, I mean, the malware side of things, retooling malware, you can have a dev guy do that in a week, or a team of dev guys. I mean, these guys had so many resources available. It wasn't really the development of the new tool. It was gaining accesses back into those victims, those high-profile victims that they had access for. Was one of the big things.
From my perspective, one of the big things that helped the equation was the fact that we had so many large partners that we were all informed. If it was just one entity doing this, then nobody else knows and everyone's playing catch-up. We had 12, 15 people all knowing that this was going on, all of which had a huge proportion of industry as a whole represented as their customer base. And then probably the final thing is over-analysis of the intel gain loss equation is a horribly detrimental thing for everyone, because while you're trying to calculate that, people are stealing your stuff and everyone else's stuff. There's a line in there, and I think it's something we all have to struggle with, but there's definitely a line in there in which you get analysis paralysis, and you end up not actually doing anything because you feel like you have these guys under a microscope. You can watch them all day long. They're still running away with their stuff.
Yeah, we don't have a good way to judge effectiveness, metrics on effectiveness of indicators cross industry. I mean, I don't even know how to approach that problem. But like, I know that indicators against the lesser sophisticated groups are definitely better because they reuse C2 and things like that. But for the more sophisticated groups, the more sophisticated they get, the value of the indicators becomes less and less because they can think through our perspective. Believe me, an actor like this is thinking about how the defenders think. And they're doing like what Paul was saying, if I'm going to take an action, what's going to be their reaction? These guys are definitely thinking about that.
So it's interesting you mentioned the APT1 report. So the calculus in the Intel gain loss there was more, yeah, these guys are clowns, so releasing everything we know about them can cause them serious pain because they don't have the ability to retool, deploy new malware as quickly, as effectively as some of the more advanced groups. So here we have a group that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum for Chinese APT groups, where the calculus was made, hey, we want to cause these guys pain. But what we saw from our perspective is the new backdoors were being deployed into existing victim environments as this was happening.
Fairly quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah, you're right.
And the new backdoors were armored. They were more advanced, memory only. Like, they stepped it up incredibly quickly. So, from my perspective, unless it's a total shutdown, which I wanted to go back to the slide where you guys were talking about the detections for the certain families.
Want to go back?
Some of those families, like WinNTI, DRUSB, PlugX, they're used by like a wide variety of threat actors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your guys' calculus on, I guess HiKit in particular is probably the one that's the most well-known for this group. How much of that infrastructure that was detected and remediated was actually being used in active intrusions? How much of that was actually at victim companies versus hot points? Was any of that kind of figured out in after action? Just because from our perspective, and I know a couple other IR responder organizations, it wasn't even a blip. Like, we saw new malware, and they just kept rolling.
Yep.
So, HiKit, the Zox family, and probably one more in there, which is escaping me at the moment. We knew the majority of those were active intrusions. They were so closely tied with this particular actor that there really wasn't any way that we could have associated them otherwise.
What we did see on one victim side, and you bring up a great point, and that's something that I personally wrestle with because coming from an intelligence background, like, don't show your hand, right? But the victim in particular I'm thinking of, it took care of, not eradicating them, but it at least slowed them down. It stopped the bleeding to allow them to gain control over their visibility of the actor. It basically decreased the aperture, and it let them focus on where these guys still persisted because they were so prolific through their networks. So, there was a little bit of gain there, but again, it didn't eradicate them. I mean, these guys have so many tools. Yeah. We've seen them recently just, come in one way, throw something over there, back out of here, go over there. I mean, their lateral movement is fantastic. So I don't know if we'll ever get rid of them.
Yeah. All right, I want to move on. I'm sorry. I want to move on to the next question.
Okay, so it's, I guess, kind of a summary. Can you expound on the impact that using separate infrastructures had on sharing, and what can we do going forward to make sure we avoid a spam assassin kind of scenario? And then another question is actually, I think it would be good for this audience to maybe elaborate on some of the problems with having too many people in the room, because I don't think you can assume everybody understands that.
Oh yeah, sure. From the separate infrastructure, we actually had this problem from our aspect. You have, like Zach said, you have NDAs with customers. You have customers that are paying you to, help them protect their networks and do things like that. At the same time, we're trying to accomplish this overall goal. So there were things that were not released publicly. There were indicators out there that weren't because of that very thing, is that it would be giving away victimology and things like that. At the same time, we did go to the customers and ask them to actually participate, or the victims, I should say, and they were actually part of the group. So they approved the sharing of the information amongst the group. As far as too many cooks in the kitchen, I think that's probably.
So that's kind of a fun one. I mean, the logistical issue of having too many cooks in the kitchen is fun. We ended up having to revert back for a lot of the coordination of the group as a whole back to email and effectively public notepads, and that worked, but there was some pain there.
I think it also goes kind of back to your planning and your what's the objective of your campaign, and then who's essentially your Voltron that you want to attach to it, and the different phases of that operation. Like certain people will be in a supporting role, and some people will be in a supported role. Some people might be doing something directly operationally, and then maybe shifting over to reporting later on when someone else picks up another phase of the operation. Being able to kind of coordinate a playbook or a plan, and then adhering to that plan when it does make first contact with the enemy, because it will fall apart. But to a certain degree, you at least had that, and you've put together kind of that process and prepared people for that, that flexibility.
The first casualty of war is the plan.
Sure. Yeah. And there's quite a few of those.
I mean, you brought up a good point. Not everybody can be the black line, right?
Right.
Somebody's got to be the little blue line over here on the left arm, right? So it's about knowing your role and play nicely with others, and at the end, everybody kind of gets their slice, and
Well, I mean, that was definitely a good thing. We didn't have anyone try to take too much take the glory, kind of things like that. I mean, everyone was there, everyone was willing, everyone was moving towards the same mission, and I think more than anything else, having everyone be on board with the overall objective is the most important thing.
Yeah, nobody tried to hijack it for PR. I think I think we should all be really proud of that.
Oh, so that's actually my question. The marketing gain loss for this, you all work for vendors, right? And how do you, as the analyst on the front, because vendors are using these reports for marketing, right? So and Noveta's a good example. Of course, I knew who Noveta was before, but I think a lot of people outside of this area learned who you guys were. So as the guys on the ground running this, the benefit to shut down this infrastructure, how do you battle the marketing folks within your vendor organizations that see this as an opportunity to increase the brand, increase sales?
Yeah, it's like you don't, if you screw this up once, you're not going to be invited back to the table. So like value the opportunity, and selfishly, we had the opportunity to learn and watch how an organization or multiple organizations collaborate in a distributed way, trying to get this type of analysis out of email, out of spreadsheets, and being able to get it into a common area that you can then act on it quickly was our selfish interest, not necessarily the big lights.
No, I don't think so at all. I think from a practical context, to answer your question, Noveta's chief marketing officer spoke with every other marketing department of everyone else, and I think that kind of encapsulates why there wasn't a big marketing war at the end of the day. We had people who spoke a language speaking to their counterparts who spoke the same language, and that works out really well, I think. And up there on the board right now, we have a bullet point that says, the tear sheets, the Rosetta Stone, and the post-action surveys help present a coordinated front, and that's what it comes down to. Every single technical person, every single marketing individual, all of upper management got pre-formatted tear sheets that told them, this is what's happening, this is the plan, this is who your point of contact is, this is who your technical person's point of contact is. The communication helped a lot.
Yeah, I didn't get any friction from my marketing department. And we actually carved up the PR stuff between different organizations involved with it. Like we all, kind of made sure we had the same talking points in terms of, this is about cross-industry effort. This is about interdiction. This is about causing the actor pain. This is about showing that, we can work together with an industry to, share information without, it being all about creating another white paper that the sales guys can use.
Yes.
And we all had those same talking points, and we all went out with them. I think almost most of the people in the group did some kind of PR effort, but it was what was light PR effort. And frankly, from a marketing perspective, this stuff is more useful to organizations like mine when I'm having one-on-one conversations with people like you than it is when it comes to email blasts and things like that. because if you look at you read the paper, people like us know what's going on there, right? The typical buyer decision maker type person has no freaking idea what a TTP is in a lot of cases, or at least the first people you're reaching. There's like one person in any given organization of a smaller size that actually gets this stuff. I think that's one of the takeaways. We got to figure out ways to do these kind of efforts that don't involve being marketing tools.
We had a real quick though. I mean, at one point we did have internal frictions. I had to hit my PR guy up and just be like, look, sit down, listen. This is for the better good. We'll get our time eventually, and we'll follow suit. The bigger friction problem that we had internally within our company was, here's a big list of indicators that we sell as a product, and how can we justify giving away intellectual property, that's what they call it on our side, to a collective group where some of them included competitors, for example. And that was the bigger friction point that we had internally, was getting that authorized and approved to basically say, okay, it's better, in the long run, so we'll do it. But that's a very difficult process for us, at least, to go through.
All right, I want to move on to the next question here.
And talking about bringing pain to the adversary, I wondered if you had ever contemplated doing anything like a misinformation campaign or counterintelligence, and maybe even working with the FBI to do some kind of Title 18 type of thing?
Oh, deception is one of my favorite things in the world of intelligence. I don't think we actually ever, thought up any kind of misdirection strategies or anything like that. But that's a worthy area to think about and discuss. Because I think that deception and misdirection is probably one of the most underutilized tools in our toolkit these days, as far as our craft goes. Because I know I've used misdirection, deception against adversaries when I've been dealing with them, and found it very effective. Like, trying to, I'm going to say kill chain. Like trying to let the adversary know that they're getting to C2 every time when you're catching them in delivery, and those kind of things on a tactical level. On a strategic information warfare level, we haven't really done anything, and that's an interesting area to explore.
I think that's one of those things we need to carefully consider before we begin walking down that path.
That's kind of an advanced move. The fact that we all could answer the phone together and tie our shoes was
All right, that was a good question. Next question.
Yeah, my question's kind of on similar lines, but I was just wondering, when you planned the operation, did you at all sort of develop a concerted strategy to try and drive the actors to a place where you had more visibility of their activities, to try and minimize that sort of intel loss gain sort of ratio?
For Novetta's part, we didn't do any herding. We had a handful of partners that we knew were compromised. We already had visibility in there. We didn't attempt to herd the actors any further. If we had tried to do that, I think that there's a concern that if you touch the actor too much, he'll figure out that you're there, and you'll lose that one big punch that you get from being a coordinated effort.
One item that I thought we could have done better, if I can kind of highlight that, is in terms of infrastructure, again, from a diamond methodology standpoint, there was a huge emphasis on capability, and there wasn't really much done on the infrastructure side, where perhaps with more time, more resources, something like that could have been done, or at least just eradicated the entire infrastructure and burned all that. But
there were some logistical issues there. Their focus on compromised infrastructure would have been, we would have been all over the place. But you're right. Having had more time, there are probably ways for that. But I think some of their practices about burning their own infrastructure when they were done with the campaign would have foiled some of those efforts.
Oh, and burning their own infrastructure when they realize somebody's investigating.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a matter of execution maturity as well, right?
There is
so
an effort to that,
as that gets better, then we'll be able to execute on some of those more advanced options.
Has anybody done a tabletop using game theory to identify what the next set of patterns that are obvious in this process? Smiling, because that's what I think about.
Individual companies and whatnot, I know have, but I don't know about, or our group in itself hasn't.
No, not yet.
But that's a good idea.
So, sorry to bug you guys again. At the end of the day, given how quickly we saw them rebound and the effort involved in the collaboration, do you think it's a net win?
It depends on how you answer it. Yeah, I'm going to answer it from the fact that operationally, that was a win. Like that we were able to, plan to a certain degree and execute, against a common adversary or a common plan. That was a win. The fact that they're still persistent, they're still really good. I think it just highlights that maybe the resources that they had, how motivated they are to continue doing this sort of thing. Like, I mean, maybe the effort needs to be larger next time, more resources. I mean, I don't know what adding 2 people to that would it have diminished by 75%. I don't think we're there yet, but we need to do these enough times to then be able to answer in the affirmative.
I'm gonna actually kind of ask a more specific question along the same lines of you guys, which is how do you measure rebound? So you've got a problem, right? And you take some steps, right? Stimulus response, you cause some effect, right? And that effect has a certain duration. So time, of course, is one, right? But maybe what is the measure for rebound, and what does that look like right now, right? So how far have they rebounded since then? And I think that's kind of one of those measures that Barry's getting at is if we can see what that is, we can gauge success and then tweak the execution or the operation accordingly.
So I think that's something that obviously we need to do. We're collecting it now. The partners that we know were compromised are sending us still some data and telemetry, and we've obviously got the larger AV partners reporting that they've had X number of remediations, material like that. I agree that we need to have probably something a little deeper, so we've got a more fine-grained understanding of exactly what's going on and material along those lines. This was the first time we had this kind of framework and these people all together, so there is a maturity question there, which I think will get better as we do the next one. Responding back to some of the original question, if a man is robbing my neighbor, it is in my best interest to try and help my neighbor out. If that man comes back, it's still in my good interest to go back again at some point. I mean, these are not one and done operations. These are ongoing efforts. Just because they can come back with more tools behind them and they can adapt to us, we can adapt too. I mean, they're working with the same flesh and blood we are.
Yeah, interdiction is cumulative, right? Now, we took out, one set of tools that they were using, and they clearly had the ability to roll another set of tools, and then we tweaked and we tried to affect their set of tools. But we've got to kind of keep this operational tempo going, right? Because at a certain point, their effort in order to retool starts to go up. Because we know these guys were prepared to retool, but how long can we keep them retooling before their operational costs start to get prohibitive enough to where they have to shrink their target set? And I think that's the big thing. If we can take them from a situation where they are actively maintaining 500 targets down to only being able to maintain 250 active targets, that's the point where we're starting to get a win, a serious win. And that's why we've got to keep pushing this kind of cooperation.
And it's not just the malware, it's the operational practice too.
Yeah.
If they can come back with new malware, that's one thing. But if I know what their playbook looks like, I'll just find them again.
Right. So one thing we're going to move on to the next question here, but one thing we need to, I think, begin considering is in these metrics, not necessarily the amount of infrastructure they've accessed, how many infections, things like that, but how many organizations.
Yeah.
That's the real gauge in my mind of impact. Is not how big your infrastructure is, but if you've got 500 hosts and they're all in the same company, really the impact is one. It's to that company, it's major, but.
Quick question. So how did you guys identify the victims?
So there were a couple of ways. Some of us actually had personal relationships with victims in question. For other partners in the coalition, they were customers. So there was a monetary relationship there. When remediation information started coming back, the ecosystem the ecosystem partner, whoever owns the remediation information, they kept their own telemetry. So we do actually, there is a number somewhere for how many organizations were affected, how many organizations have been worked with. I can't give you a I can't give you a specific number for that, mostly because my AV partners might be under some kind of NDA which says you cannot in any way, shape, or form reveal anyone who has been affected. Some of our AV partners were only able to say we saw 7 different companies, and that was the only information they could give us.
Or verticals or
Right.
something like that.
That is kind of a sticking point when working with a large group, but you have to be able to respect that kind of NDA. And at the end of the day, they're still able to give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, if nothing else, for this did in fact have a remediated effort. We saw this. This was a win in terms of we made something stall somewhere.
Yeah, and we have no reason to distrust those partners because if it didn't have an effect, they would be giving us a thumbs down and saying, yeah, we're not so interested in allocating as many resources to this. And instead, it's been, by all accounts,
they wanted to come back. Yeah. They wanted to come back for round 2.
Yeah.
Hi. Can you comment on any of your interactions you had with government departments, agencies, whether it's DHS or FBI, or what the role of the government should be in this kind of industry-led effort?
So we get this question a lot, at least everybody says, was LE involved, was Gov involved, are they pissed off that you dumped all this intel out there, yada, 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 right? I mean, really the big problem is when you work with a government entity or LE, one of the main outcomes of this was to share data, was to get the word out and to get people to understand what's going on. When you have a government entity involved, there's a lot of other NDAs that you have to worry about, and you can't share this, you can't do that, whatever. So the decision was made, I mean, initially was to do this through private industry. LE was aware of what was going on. The right players knew what was happening. They may not have been happy about it. And from our perspective, some of those people are customers, so we have to kind of skate that line too. But, I mean,
there's advantages to having this done in 3 months too.
Yeah,
like
exactly. It could have been a year.
Yeah,
right?
or 5. We would have admired it for quite some time.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day,
they
get notified. They're a victim too for some of them, but they were not a directed.
Yeah,
they were not.
They were aware.
Partner. Yeah.
You keep saying the word NDA like it's a bad thing, and it could be. Is it time to bring in the legal counsel and the executive, the decision makers, and rethink the way we do NDAs in light of what your lessons learned were to allow for better collaboration in the future?
I didn't feel like we had a big problem.
No, there wasn't really that big of an issue, honestly. It was
I don't even remember many red lines flying back and forth. It was pretty, let's get the MNDAs up, let's, and on top of it, I think, the circle of trust thing, I think played a big role because, coming in, and say, hey, top priority for me is, protecting my customers. I don't want anything here that identifies a customer. It can't happen. And everybody's like, okay, I agree. That was more important than any of the NDAs. But yeah, I don't remember much red line activity or anything.
The NDAs, personally myself, the NDA helped me pitch this to our boss and say, hey, we're covered, it's okay. If somebody messes up, we can go after them kind of deal, right? It's a protection thing.
Everybody looked at the whole NDA thing with the same equity, right? So.
I think part of the challenge there, though, is measuring your success in aggregate form with those NDAs in place, right? How many organizations did you impact? How many verticals did you impact, et cetera? And with those NDAs in place, if you have to obfuscate that, and I'm not saying that it's improper or should be different, but it creates challenges in gauging your success, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that some of the ecosystem partners don't want to be identified. They don't want their customers coming up and going, hey, we were dealing with this act, or were you sharing info and that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of acceptable. I mean, working in this game, you get very used to the idea that sometimes people are going to tell you information. You're going to have to take it on face value based on the degree you trust that person and their information has been correct in the past.
Yeah.
And we're used to that.
And putting on my Lockheed Martin cert hat, there's no way we would let you guys reveal that to anyone else if you were if we were working with you. So it's a hard problem. Yeah.
So, can you give technical examples of, since you couldn't share specific indicators because of specific infrastructures per victim, what kind of information did you share that allowed detection by other entities?
Explain the config file versus
stuff that was actionable. So some of it was actionable and not actionable, right? Like some of the
domain names, for example, had victim information in them, right? And publicizing that overall would just simply serve to shame a victim for no good reason.
But we can tell
regarding specific material that we shared. When we released the reporting, we released a whole pile of Yara signatures. We released a couple of other bits of information, snort signatures. I think the individual partners themselves obviously made whatever modifications they needed to for their own. Everyone's got a different way of doing their own signatures, so all of that went out. If you're protected by pretty much any of the major AVs or ecosystem vendors, you've probably got a signature in there for our stuff. Every single one of them that we worked with published some kind of blog saying, yep, we're part of this effort, this is the threat, this is the specific ID number regarding our remediation strategy inside of our product, this is where it is. So there was a lot of very actionable things published to everyone.
And all kind of going in place in this roughly the same exact period of time.
Yeah,
which
2
I think
days
was kind of
yeah.
impressive. It was like a 48-hour window for everybody in the effort. Just poof, here's the indicators. And I mean, like some of the things is like with HiKit, and one of you guys are going to have to probably correct me, but there's, you know, the malware portion is kind of a config file portion, right? And the config file identifies victims, right? So we would hold that stuff back, but push out the indicators for the rest of the pile, you know, out there. And the domain name example is really good. I mean, did we actually had victim notifications involved in
yeah,
this?
that
Yes.
specific victim was actually part of the collaboration, so it was at their request to not release that domain. But honestly speaking, that domain is one of there was very few things.
Yeah.
I think
It was
that we
only
actually
useful
had
to them
strike
anyway.
To
down.
them,
Right.
exactly.
And it was
That it
useful
only
to
applied to
them.
them. It wouldn't have applied to a larger audience, so there's really no value to it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we deal with that from a vendor perspective. Is we'll get, you know, intelligence all the time. That's not stuff that we can just bake into the you know, the indicators that go out in the product. But like we can say, oh, we've got a customer over there that's affected by that, and that's when, you know, we actually pick up the phone and go, hey, got some, you know, kind of intel here. You might want to call the FBI and ask them about this thing. Here's the guy who knows about it. So you know, that kind of thing is happening more and more in the industry, and I think that's, you know, a part of being a good partner with your customers is, you know, sometimes those situations are going to arise, and you know, you just don't bury them.
All right, I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions.
You guys decide to do this again, improve your collaboration.
Already decided.
Oh, yeah,
Going
we're doing this
after
again.
different targets. Do you ever worry in the fact that you're publicly speaking about
Every day.
potentially big adversary that could have extensive resources?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
worry
yeah,
about
I-
the target painted on your back?
Let me take this one.
Yeah.
All right, so I spend a lot of time studying China and whatnot. I've traveled extensively to China. I have been to Shaolin. I have climbed Mount Song. My kung fu is strong. I have paid my respects to the Dharma Booty. You know, I've spent extensive time operating overseas, and a large chunk of it after I have been a very public figure in the you know, the counter APT community. The one thing I will say, because I actually genuinely like the Chinese people and a lot of things about Chinese culture. I have a lot of issues with their government, but they are very polite about the way they play the espionage game. They're very polite about it. In fact, when I'm there on tourism, I've never been screwed with. When I'm there on business, my hotel room gets tossed and all that kind of stuff. So, like, they're polite. Obey the visa rules. If you go to China on a tourist visa, don't do business. You will catch hell. But they're very polite about it. So I think in terms of our engagement, we've got to be careful with the personal attacks and stuff like that, because that could change real fast. But I wouldn't be too worried about it.
We are. I mean,
If you ever hear me mysteriously being killed overseas, change your mind.
Where's your best honeypot for espionage information? But the people that are tracking you, right?
I would assume that you're not going to go after any Russian state sponsor stuff. You don't get the polonium.
That's a different.
Polonium cup of tea. Yeah.
So we're going to limit this to Chinese.
It goes actor by actor.
Participant.
Yeah, that goes actor by actor.
I mean, that is a valid point, though. Honestly, when you're doing this, you have to weigh that and actually, you know, kind of understand: are these guys going to kind of play by the rules, or are these the ones that'll like burn the house down? And
So,
you know, you gotta think about that.
I'm just going to retire whenever
Practice
your
good
Uber car blows
OPSEC.
up.
You're
All
operating
right,
in
I
those
think
environments. Very good OPSEC.
I think we're pretty much out of time. So on that final, somewhat amusing comment, I think we're going to wrap it up. Everyone, please, a round of applause for our panel here.
Thank you.